Richard counts on our apathy, replied James Chen, adjusting his glasses. As the local high school's ecology teacher, he brought disturbing before and after photos of creek wildlife. He knows most people won't fight back. Well, I'm fighting back, declared Maria Rodriguez, whose basement had flooded 3 inches deep. My daughter's quinceanera dress was in storage down there. It's ruined. Her voice cracked with emotion. Momentum built with each small gathering Eleanor hosted. Jason and Keith from the cul-de-sac brought homemade kombucha and technical expertise, setting up a private neighborhood forum where residents could safely discuss the issue without Richard's oversight. Teenage sisters Lily and Zoe created eye-catching Save Our Creek graphics that began appearing in windows throughout Whispering Pines. The alliance faced setbacks. Richard's allies on the board issued Eleanor a series of petty compliance violations. Anonymous notes appeared in mailboxes claiming the creek harbored dangerous bacteria. But for every intimidation tactic, the community response grew stronger. The turning point came when Eleanor knocked on the door of Margaret Whitfield, an elderly resident who rarely left her home, and was known to support Richard unquestioningly. "I know why you're here," Margaret said before Eleanor could speak. "Come in." Inside, Margaret showed Eleanor a collection of photographs from the 1970s, Whispering Pines in its early days, with neighborhood children playing in the very same creek. In one faded image, a young girl with braids held up a small frog, beaming. "That's me," Margaret said softly. "Richard doesn't know I grew up here before moving back to care for my mother. That creek was the heartbeat of this neighborhood once." She picked up her phone. "Tell me what I can do to help." By month's end, Eleanor's petition had 87 signatures, representing over 2/3 of homeowners. More importantly, they had something Richard would never expect. Margaret Whitfield, his most reliable supporter, had agreed to speak against him. The monthly HOA meeting was normally held in the small community room at the local library, with attendance rarely exceeding a dozen residents. But on this humid June evening, cars overflowed the parking lot. Inside, folding chairs were hastily added to accommodate the crowd, many wearing blue ribbons pinned to their shirts. Richard's composure visibly faltered as he called the meeting to order, his eyes darting nervously around the packed room. "We have a full agenda tonight, so we'll need to be efficient with time," he announced, shuffling papers. "Landscaping committee report first, then." "Point of order," called Darius from the second row, standing to his impressive height. "There's an urgent community matter that should take precedence. I move to amend the agenda." Before Richard could object, board member Evelyn Parker seconded the motion. A quick vote forced Richard to yield the floor. Eleanor approached the podium calmly, though her heart hammered in her chest. She connected her laptop to the projector and began a methodical presentation of evidence. Side-by-side creek photos, highlighted regulations, property records, and expert statements. In summary, she concluded 15 minutes later, this unauthorized dam violates county environmental regulations, HOA bylaws requiring board votes on major modifications, and the property rights of every resident whose land touches this creek. Richard's face had turned progressively redder throughout her presentation. He stood abruptly. "This is ridiculous fearmongering." The board discussed the drainage issue informally and— "No, we didn't," interrupted Evelyn Parker, her typically quiet voice firm. "I served on this board for 5 years, and this was never brought to us for discussion or vote." The room erupted in murmurs. Richard attempted to regain control, his voice rising. "The creek is a liability issue. I've protected this neighborhood from potential lawsuits." It was then that Margaret Whitfield rose slowly from her seat in the front row, using her cane for support. The room fell silent. "I've lived in this neighborhood for 37 years, Richard," she said, her voice thin but clear. "That creek has never harmed anyone. But your dam flooded my cellar and destroyed photo albums of my late husband." She turned to face the crowd. "I've supported Richard for years because I thought he had our best interests at heart. I was wrong." A stunned silence followed, broken by a slow building applause. Richard's face drained of color as he realized he'd lost control of not just the meeting, but his carefully cultivated power base. The emergency session called by the HOA board took place at the gazebo by the neighborhood playground, neutral territory away from the usual meeting room. Richard was notably absent, having sent a terse email about a previously scheduled commitment. All 5 remaining board members voted unanimously to remove the dam and to allocate HOA emergency funds for professional environmental remediation of the creek. They also authorized an independent audit of all HOA decisions made in the past year. "We should have been more vigilant," admitted Board Treasurer Howard Klein. "This is as much our failure as Richard's overreach." The morning the contractors arrived to dismantle the dam, Eleanor awoke to find her front yard filled with neighbors. Some brought coffee and breakfast tacos. Others carried tools, ready to help with the cleanup that would follow. Children darted excitedly between adults, eager to see the creek flow again. When the final concrete block was removed, a cheer went up as water rushed through, finding its natural path again. James Chen organized the children into a creek patrol, giving them nets to safely remove debris and test water quality downstream. Richard's house sold 2 weeks later, at $50,000 below his asking price. The new owners, a young couple with twin toddlers, were enthusiastically welcomed to the neighborhood potluck held along the banks of the restored creek. At that gathering, Eleanor was surprised when Evelyn Parker clinked at last for attention. "We have an announcement," she said, flanked by the other board members. "The board has unanimously voted to create a creek conservation committee with real authority and a dedicated budget, and we'd like Eleanor Thomas to chair it." Blushing, Eleanor accepted on the condition that decisions would be transparent and inclusive. The committee's first action was to install educational signs about the watershed ecosystem, designed by high school students from James Chen's ecology class. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Eleanor was enjoying coffee on her deck when she spotted movement in the creek. A family of river otters, not seen in Whispering Pines for over a decade, played in the clear running water, sliding down the muddy bank and splashing playfully. She snapped a photo and posted it to the neighborhood forum with the caption, "Property values, priceless." Within minutes, neighbors began gathering along the creek banks, bringing children, cameras, and an impromptu celebration of morning coffee and shared muffins. The simple joy of community and nature in perfect, restored balance. As the seasons changed, the story of how Whispering Pines saved its creek became neighborhood legend, retold at every welcome gathering for new residents as a reminder that one person's determination, combined with the power of community, could turn the tide, quite literally, when it mattered most. Eleanor Thomas was enjoying her morning ritual, coffee on her back deck at dawn, when the absence of sound caught her attention. The gentle babbling of Willow Creek, which had been her daily soundtrack for 9 years, had fallen eerily silent. Setting down her mug, she ventured to the creek's edge where yesterday water had flowed freely. Now, only a pathetic trickle remained, barely wetting the exposed, glistening rocks. "What on earth?" she whispered, noticing a confused family of mallards circling the nearly dry creek bed. Abandoning her half-finished coffee, Eleanor followed the creek upstream in her bathrobe and garden boots, ducking under low-hanging willows and navigating through morning damp underbrush. 3 properties up, she froze at the sight of a monstrous barrier, concrete blocks stacked 6 feet high, reinforced with industrial plastic sheeting and expanding foam. Behind it, water pooled unnaturally, already attracting clouds of mosquitoes. A voice from behind startled her. "Admiring my handiwork, Eleanor?" She whirled to find Richard Harrison standing there in pressed khakis and a polo shirt embroidered with the Whispering Pines HOA logo, an outfit he seemed to wear like a uniform of authority. The smirk on his face matched the smugness in his voice. "You did this, without telling anyone." "Richard, this creek feeds the entire ecosystem of our neighborhood." Eleanor's voice rose with each question. Richard's smile didn't falter. "As HOA president, I don't need to consult with every resident about decisions that protect our community." He gestured broadly toward the dam. "This creek brings snakes, raccoons, and who knows what else into our yards. Mrs. Abernathy complained about a coyote last month. Besides, he added, checking his manicured nails, water features decrease property values unless they're properly controlled, like my koi pond. He pointed to his own artificially constructed water feature visible in his backyard. When Eleanor pressed about permits and environmental impact, Richard's expression hardened. The board agreed this was necessary, he stated flatly, though his eyes shifted away as he spoke. I suggest you worry about your own property, Eleanor. Speaking of which, those hydrangeas you planted last fall violate the color scheme guidelines. You might want to address that before our next compliance review. As he walked away, Eleanor noticed the brand new for SAAE sign at the edge of Richard's immaculately landscaped lawn, the morning sun glinting off its fresh surface. He can't possibly have the authority to do this, Eleanor muttered, spreading documents across her dining room table 2 days later, her reading glasses perched on her nose. She compared highlighted sections of the HOA bylaws with county waterway regulations she'd printed from the municipal website. Her neighbor and friend, Darius Washington, a retired environmental engineer, sat across from her, frowning at a topographical map of the neighborhood. This creek doesn't just provide aesthetics, Eleanor. It's part of the watershed management system. Blocking it could cause flooding upstream and drought conditions downstream. Eleanor's laptop dinged with an email notification. It's from Marianne at the county clerk's office, she said, opening the message. She says there's no record of any permit application for waterway modification in Whispering Pines in the last 5 years. Which means our illustrious HOA president is operating completely outside the law, Darius concluded, his deep voice resonating with satisfaction. Eleanor clicked through to Richard's property listing that another neighbor had forwarded. The asking price was nearly $100,000 above comparable homes in the area, and the listing's main photo showed his backyard with the artificially elevated creek, creating what the description called a private waterfront view. So he dams the creek, raises the water level behind his property to create a waterfront, then tries to cash in before anyone notices the downstream damage, Eleanor summarized, removing her glasses. Classic Richard. A local environmental attorney named Sofia Valdez confirmed their suspicions during a consultation the next day. This isn't a gray area, she explained, pointing to specific statutes. It's black and white violation of riparian law and the Clean Water Act. He's also potentially liable for any property damage from flooding or ecosystem harm. As Eleanor left the attorney's office, her phone buzzed with a neighborhood watch alert. Several residents were reporting flooded basements after the previous night's rain, all in homes upstream from Richard's dam. I still can't believe he did this without even a notice to the neighborhood, said Susan Miller, a silver-haired grandmother who had lived in Whispering Pines since it was built. She sat on Eleanor's back deck with 7 other neighbors.